And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our platform today where we are advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism, exposing the rhinos in public leadership in Louisiana, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Thank you so much for inviting us into your homes, your cars, or letting us join you while you're running your errands. Wherever this may find you, we're so grateful that you're listening. And we are in this endorsement series still. And I just want to encourage you to keep listening and sharing. We know that only one or two of the people we bring on the show during this time are going to be representing your area. But these Louisiana First candidates are really of critical importance to the future of our state. We know that it was laid bare for all to see during the veto override session, just the amount of damage that weak-willed and morally bankrupt rhinos can do in a very, very short period of time. So it's incredibly important to support these leaders who are poised to push out the people who are destroying our state. So today we have a powerhouse candidate with us who has stood up to do just that. His name is Tim Kerner Jr., and he's running for State Senate in District 8. Before we meet Tim, let me get us to the scripture of the day. It is Psalm 105, verses 1 through 4. And it says, "Go ahead and give God thanks for all the glorious things he has done. Go ahead and worship him. Tell everyone about his wonders. Let's sing his praises. Sing and put all of his miracles to music. Shine and make your joyful boast in him, you lovers of God. Let's be happy and keep rejoicing no matter what. Seek more of his strength. Seek more of him. Let's always be seeking the light of his face. Don't you ever forget his miracles and marvels. Hold to your heart every judgment he has decreed." And lately it seems like the Lord has a theme, which is for us to keep his eyes on him. He's saying, don't focus on the chaos. Don't focus on the naysayers. Don't focus on your problems. Instead, focus on worshiping him. Our attitude and our focus are choices that we get to make. And it makes such an incredible difference when we choose to make God the center of our attention and our conversations and energy. And I was really reminded of that recently. I was in a car ride with my friend Vicky, and we didn't do this on purpose, but we ended up in a long conversation about our history with the Lord. And I just noticed that at the end of the trip, even though it was a long trip and a long weekend, we were both so encouraged, so energized, and felt so much lighter. And I think this is just the power of testimony and recounting the faithfulness of the Lord. This is the power of making God the center of our focus.
Stay positive and keep rejoicing. I like that. And keep affirming one another in our mission. That is very, very powerful. Keep rejoicing. One of the things, Danielle, that I'm rejoicing about is the fact that Timothy Kerner is in the race for state senate to replace the rhino Patrick Connick. And before I introduce Tim, I wanted to reiterate what you said a couple of minutes ago about how even though most of the guests that we have, I mean, many of our listeners will not be voting directly for most of these candidates. However, our state legislature and what they do there or fail to do affects all of us in the state of Louisiana, not just those in the districts of a particular representative. So I'll just firmly reiterate what you said, that we all need to be moving forward and helping one another to elect good constitutional conservatives to the state house, because what they do there affects us all. That having been said, as you said, we have the Timothy Kerner on the phone with us this morning, who's running for state senate over in District 8. Tim, welcome to the show. What a privilege it is to have you aboard this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Chris and Danielle. I really appreciate being on this.
Let's start, Tim, by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your background, professional and personal, and what made you decide to run for this most important state senate seat.
Yeah, well, look, first off, I want to say, pardon my voice. I'm just getting over a cold. But look, I'm a former prosecutor, and I served as mayor of Lafitte, the town of Jean Lafitte, for 3.5 years. I led him through Hurricane Ida, through the recovery of Lower Lafitte, Barrett-Terre, and Crown Point, and I think we did a good job in revitalizing the area. You know, when I served as mayor, We actually won cleanest city of the state, the highest cumulative score out of any population in the state of Louisiana 3 years in a row. And why that means something is because we were arguably ground zero for Hurricane Ida. We had 4 foot of mud throughout that compromised our drainage systems that went in the house, and it just showed how fast we cleaned. I'm also the first man in history to ever win back-to-back Best of Show awards for the idea of a project execution and handling of a project at the LMA convention. So look, I think we've done a good job. But one thing we've showed as mayor is that we could overcome any obstacle. But look, I'm an attorney by trade. I actually ended up winning my election 95%. If that goes to show you, what the people thought of my job there. But look, I'm an attorney by trade. I'm certainly an attorney in this. That I want to be an attorney in a Senate that's going to bring integrity back into the profession. And I'm also a realtor by trade. I'm 32 years old. I'm a strong conservative. I have a beautiful wife and an amazing 20-month-old daughter. And I tell you, that's one of the reasons why I'm in this race. We have so many people in District 8, which encompasses almost all of West Bank of Jefferson Parish and all of the West Bank of Plaquemines. So many young families leaving. We're not attracting families. We're not attracting businesses. You look at Florida, South Florida, what they're doing, and South Texas, and even South Mississippi. They're showing growth. People are investing there. People are moving there. And they have similar issues with insurance and hurricanes. So we really have no excuses why we're not growing, why we're not moving forward. And, that's probably the main reason why I'm in this race is because I believe we could do better. Not to be too long-winded, but we also, look, life's hard all over the country right now, as we know with the administration we have. But it shouldn't be this hard in District 8. I mean, we are the heart, the hands, and the backbone of the state of Louisiana with our fishing industry and our culture. And right now, fishermen are starving. They're being treated like second-class citizens. So I have a lot of reasons to get in this race and fight for this district and the state of Louisiana. So look, I'm excited. If God says the same, I'm gonna get in there. I'm gonna give them the strongest voice they've had in a very, very long time.
What would you say, Tim, at this point, looking at District 8, which, as you said, encompasses, Plaquemines Parish, Jefferson Parish, when you talk to the voters in that district, in your district, family, friends, what are they telling you is the biggest concern or a couple of biggest concerns that they have? You may have alluded to them just now, but what specifically are their concerns?
Well, look, this district is plagued with neglect and problems. Overall, almost every person I talk to, they feel forgotten. They feel underrepresented. They feel like the job's not getting done. And many of them don't even know who their senator is. The guy I'm running against hadn't had an election in 16 years. You look at Avondale and Wagaman, their parks are in despair. They hadn't had a grocery store in 3 years. They have to travel 45 minutes to the grocery store, and that's if they don't catch the train. And you have places in Plaquemines in this great country where they can't even drink the water. The kids can't even take the bath in South Plaquemines. As far as Barataria Boulevard, which has so much potential, if anybody's familiar with the West Bank, Barataria Boulevard in Lapalco has so much potential. Has such a wonderful group of people that are willing to go and spend money at restaurants and spend money there, but it's been neglected. And right now, the East Bank of Jefferson's winning and the West Bank's losing. So look, there's been plenty of people forgotten in this district, and that's why I'm running. I'm running for the forgotten.
It sounds to me like you're running so that you can faithfully represent the people who really have been forgotten, the poor, the downtrodden. Let me ask you another question here, Tim, moving in a slightly different direction here. We've been hearing a lot of concerns from our listeners and from citizens across the state about another COVID pandemic, another strain, perhaps the Omicron virus, and we've been hearing rustlings about more lockdowns, mask mandates, and mandatory health protocols, maybe a public health emergency declared by the governor, which he has not done, but which we are preparing for in the event that it happens. What is your position regarding any sort of mandatory lockdowns or health protocols in the event that does come about?
Well, look, I'll say I have a strong stance on the mandatory vaccines because that's where I want to start. I don't trust big pharma, and it's not a conspiracy theorist. I don't trust them based on the facts and evidence, right? You have big pharma is the same people who sent out the opiates when they did opiates and OxyContin and those things and said it wasn't addicting, right? It wasn't habit forming. Hepatitis B, we're giving 4 shots to our children right when they get out of the womb, and that was made for a specific group of people that are adults, drug addicts or promiscuous gays, and since they weren't buying, those people weren't actually using the vaccine and buying, and they built all those factories. They actually said, we need help, or we're gonna lose this money. We're gonna go out of business. So they made it a requirement for kids. I don't know many kids that experience needles or have any threat of hepatitis B. So the big pharma in general, I'm highly skeptical of. And when you talk about a vaccination that was rushed and expedited with no real serious studies.
Yeah, Tim, you're talking specifically about the COVID shot right now.
Yeah, with the COVID shot, exactly. So look, I think there's to force people to take that with so little science and so little backing, and the fact that it was so rushed, I feel is dangerous. And to take away people's personal freedoms to do that is something I will fight, unequivocally for. That I will fight with a very, very strong voice to try to prohibit that, because people have every right to make their own health choices. If an elderly person believes that shot, even though studies suggest otherwise, gives them even a 10% chance of making sure they don't catch it and don't die, then they should have a right to do it. But a young child or a person in high school or a 32-year-old healthy man should not have to take that shot. So I'm going to fight strongly against that. And as far as the lockdown, we are still seeing the remnants of that lockdown, where people are going out of business because they can't hire. People are not working, and it's hard to find employees since that. It put us in debt. It put this country in, I feel, economic crisis, and we're seeing it with inflation and the cost of everything.
And we still, frankly, Tim, we still have not recovered from that.
No, we haven't. We haven't, and we may not for a long time. And to imagine that they're considering doing that again, even though the proof is here, what it could do, and the negative impact is unacceptable, and it's something we have to fight strongly. We got to keep our economy back open.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, just thinking about, the future of you being in office as a state senator, what are some of the big opportunities you see once you get in there for advancing the state and advancing District 8? I know you talked about maybe economic development. What else is on your list of things that you'd like to achieve for the people?
Well, I can tell you, that's really a big one, the economic development. Right now, Jefferson Parish has pretty great local leaders doing a good job, but that's all it is. That's the state involvement, is just handing them pet projects. And what I want to do is I want to work with local government, but I also want to work with private entrepreneurs and citizens and create public and private co-ops, similar to what Brooklyn did, to reduce the risk of investment. So those tax dollars, we squeeze every penny's worth out of it, and we get these people to invest in by reducing the risk of it, because people right now believe it is too risky to invest in District 8, and I want to change that. And once we show some success there, more investors will come. But look, I got quite a bit of things I want to tackle. I mean, insurance is killing District 8. It's killing the state of Louisiana. And one thing, we're not first in many things, but in the state of Louisiana, but we're first in bad faith laws against the insurance company. So I believe we need tort reform. Now, the few legislations of tort reform that went through recently, the insurance companies didn't reduce any rates. So that's something we need to work closer on and address. But look, I think anybody would agree that if a state code is working against an insurance company, and it's one of the worst in the country, to open up lawsuits and have people sue them fairly easily, that's certainly not helping our situation down here. It's not helping encourage them to write affordable rates, and I think that's a major problem. Of course, my opponent is backed by, funded by many trial attorneys. When you have that much funding with trial attorneys, then it gets you in a situation where you kind of owe them against the interests of the people. And I think right now our greatest threat to South Louisiana are these insurance rates. So I think tort reform and coming up with a plan to put in place whenever we do get hit by a storm where it doesn't skyrocket for those months like we're seeing right now.
Definitely an issue that needs to be addressed regarding the insurance rates. There's no question about that. And it is important to point out that your opponent is funded substantially by trial attorneys. In fact, he is himself a personal injury attorney, which may explain, as Danielle and I will discuss later in the show, why he opposed a bill that would have eliminated liability for employers who refused to mandate the COVID shot. And that's something that we're going to get into later, along with his favorable vote on a horrible pharmacy vaccine bill in the recent legislative session. But we'll get into that more as we move forward here. How about this, Tim? What kind of reception are you receiving? I saw a picture of your initial gathering that you had announcing your candidacy, and I saw it, and it looked like the house was packed recently, the last few days.
Yeah, look, I was just, gosh, I was just so thankful and just really humbled. You know, when you have those events, and I'm running against a guy that's been in the legislature for 16 years, and we started our campaign, 14, 15 days ago, and we planned this event 5 days before, and you're hoping your message is resonating, and you're hoping you're successfully getting it out, but you don't know if people are going to show up. And the amount of people that did over, we had a list of 600 spots that people put their names, and we filled that list. So the fact that we had that many shows that our message is resonating, that people want to change. They're looking for a change. They're tired of the same old politics in the state of Louisiana, but also specifically in Jefferson Parish. Jefferson Parish elected officials have their powerful positions picked 20 years in advance. It's not working out for me and my family, and it's not working out for the families in District 8. So people, you could feel the change. This is not even an election at this point. I truly believe it's a movement. It's a movement that is going to demand accountability from those elected officials, or they're going to try somebody else, that they're going to give somebody else an opportunity to try to improve the situation.
If there's one thing that really resonates with citizens, certainly with our listeners, it's what we perceive to be a complete lack of accountability on the part of the people who we elect. And speaking of accountability, Tim, I read something that somebody wrote about you recently. I don't know if it was on Facebook or somewhere on social media, and they described you as a person who, if you're going to make suggestions, like in the event of a hurricane, a disaster, or any other event that causes great stress to people, you don't sit there and just tell people, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do. You roll up your sleeves, you're down, you're helping, you are doing everything within your power physically as a leader to help the citizens of your community. And I find that quite refreshing, that you're not simply just talking and giving advice. You're out in the sun, you're out in the mud, you're out putting your money where your mouth is. And that was the way someone described you recently who's known you for many years. Talk about the importance of being with the citizens, of being in the middle of them, of understanding their concerns and working directly with them.
Well, look, what I'll say is I'm in this business to make a difference. I love this area with every fiber in my body, and I want to fight for these people, because look, we're a very tight-knit community. Everybody in the West Bank of Jefferson, everyone in the West Bank of Plaquemines, and I love these people. And these people are wonderful, hardworking Americans. They deserve for their life not to be so hard. But look, that's what kind of candidate I want to be, and that's what kind of senator I want to be. That's what kind of mayor I was, right? You won't just see me in the state legislature, state senate, trying to fighting and being a voice for the people here. You're going to see me on the front lines during storms. You're going to see me organizing groups to clean the streets. I started with Tofield Bourgeois, a famous charter fisherman here. We started a nonprofit, Treasure Lafitte, which essentially is a volunteer organization that helps clean up the area. And that's, one of the big reasons why we won Clean the City in the state 3 years in a row while we were here. So look, I'm in this to make a difference. People are going to see my face. They're going to know me. They're going to be able to come talk to me. I know, look, I prepared myself to fight the injustices going on in the state of Louisiana, and specifically the people of District 8, those injustices, but I can't do it alone. It's not only what I could do for them and their families, it's what I'm going to ask of them, right? If we're really going to transform this district, and hopefully it catches fire and it resonates around the state, I'm going to ask a lot from them too. We're going to have to do this together to make this the state we truly want it to be, and what I believe it's destined to be. We have so much potential here. Our enriched culture is just being forgotten, really. Even our fishermen, they're being treated like second-class citizens. And look, those fishermen are a big reason why we're not in Nebraska, why we're so unique, and why people want to come here and eat, and why we have world-famous
So
food.
true. So true.
Exactly. And Tim, one of the things I really appreciate about you is exactly what you're saying. I mean, you see yourself as a citizen, as one of the people, right? And you're not part of this kind of elitist crowd that's standing up on high and kind of telling people how they need to live. This is about the future of your community. This is about being one of the people who is affected by bad governance.
Yeah, and look, we're on a dangerous course. We're on a perilous course here. We really are. And if we don't change with the flood waters and also with just the loss of young people, our best and brightest, that if we don't change it, then this district will not be a place that anybody wants to live. And I love it too much to allow that to happen. And look, I think one of the reasons why I'm in this race, my father always taught me one thing. He said, "You're not better than anybody, but no one's better than you." And I'm in this race because I love the people of this district. I want to work with them. I can't solve every problem. I'm going to need them side by side, give me ideas and telling me what's their issues and how to address them. Because look, these people know they live it. They know the problems. In a lot of cases, they know how to fix it. But I'm also not. I don't believe anyone's better than me. So that's why I'm challenging this powerful family because I believe we could be better. I believe I could do it better. I could serve as senator better for these people.
Well, Tim, I'll tell you, there's an old saying that you're probably familiar with: power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I can tell you that many voters in your district feel that your opponent, the incumbent, has lost touch with their concerns and with their interests, and has failed to represent them faithfully. I'm sure that's what you're hearing as well, and I'm sure that's a big part of the reason why you chose to run.
Yeah, look, and my family's been in politics for quite a bit too. I mean, a small community that's really had so much hardship, but you could see with the response of how the people voted for me, and you could see the response now. I think people clearly see the difference. The people that's really engaged here, they clearly see the difference of people who rule by fear and people who serve with love. And it may sound cliche, but it's the truth. It's God's honest truth, and I think that's why we have so much momentum in this campaign.
The difference between people who rule by fear and serve by love. I think that is just a fabulous expression. We're not interested in having anybody rule us by fear. We're interested in having people serve us with loyalty and with love. And it sounds to me like that is what you're about. We certainly wish you the best of luck moving forward on the trail. It sounds to me like you're getting tremendous reception out there. Keep us in the loop for sure about how you're doing. And we are so excited about supporting you and endorsing you right here at the State of Freedom.
And Tim, where can people learn more about you? Where can they find you on social media?
Well, it's Tim Kerner Jr. On Facebook. We have a Facebook page, or Timothy Kerner Jr., my personal page. We're creating a website right now as we speak. So that should be up shortly with my ideas, my vision, and what I stand for, and my principles. But look, feel free. You can find the phone number on the Facebook page, or we have an office right. If you live in a district, if you're familiar with Brian's Hair Zone and Paradise Bar, we have an office right there on the corner on Lapalco. So come see us. Look, I want to speak to every voter in this district. So do not hesitate to reach out to me. I am an open book, and I'm just asking them for an opportunity to try to save the place I love.
The voters in Jefferson's Parish and Plaquemines Parish are alert and listening. We wish you the best of luck, Tim, moving on to victory. God bless you, sir. Go get them.
God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim. You can just feel the passion in his voice, Chris. I love his humility. I love the reason he's running. I'm so thankful that he has stood up and is positioned to fight for the people of Plaquemine and Jefferson and frankly, the people of the state.
Absolutely. Did I understand him correctly, Danielle, when he said that he was reelected mayor of Lafitte with 95% of the vote? Did I understand that right?
That's amazing. Yes, that's exactly what he said.
Well, I think that is a clear reflection of the affection that the citizens have for him and his willingness to faithfully represent them. Like I said, he's been described to me as someone who will roll his sleeves up and never asks anybody to do anything that he does not do himself, and usually is right out front in doing. What a contrast between Timothy Kerner and his opponent, the incumbent Patrick Connick.
Yeah, well, I think, one thing we talked about, Chris, is that Patrick Connick has a record of overspending our tax dollars and overtaxing taxpayers. I mean, looking back just at this session, he was one of the legislators who voted to bust the constitutional spending cap. And I think we even saw that in 2018, he voted to increase sales taxes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. House Bill 10, 2018, one of the major sales tax increases in Louisiana history, projected to cost the taxpayer about over $3 billion. Patrick Connick voted for that sales tax increase. Is there any person in the state of Louisiana, any citizen who would ever argue that we're not taxed enough in the state of Louisiana? How about some legislation to reduce taxes? No, Patrick Connick voted in favor of a massive tax increase, sales tax increase in 2018. Additionally, as you just said, Danielle, he voted to explode the spending cap. Certainly was not one of the conservative legislators who argued against that exploding that constitutional spending cap. He is a tax and spender. There's no question about it. Not a constitutional conservative by any stretch.
Well, and from what we've seen in digging into his record, it really seems that he is more aligned with the governor than he is with the people. And that's remarkable. But look, he inexplicably was absent, right, for House Bill 125 in the veto override session. Remind us what that bill stood to do to protect the people of the state.
Absolutely, I will do that. But before I do that, I want to remind our listeners about 2020. I want to remind our listeners about Governor Edwards' tyrannical COVID lockdown and emergency pandemic decrees when Representative Alan Seabaugh, after months and months and months of our state being locked down, was circulating a petition trying to get support from legislators to revoke Governor Edwards' emergency decree. And would you like to venture a guess as to which legislature was about as silent as a church mouse and offered no support whatsoever to the citizens of Louisiana who were yearning to get back to work, yearning to have their state reopened, yearning to have their families reunited and get back to some degree of normalcy? Guess who offered zero support in that effort?
Yeah, I guess it was Patrick Connick,
It was Patrick Connick.
amongst other rhinos.
Not only Patrick Connick, there are a number of names to go around, but today we're focused on Patrick Connick. That is something that the voters in Plaquemines Parish and Jefferson Parish must not forget. His failure of leadership at arguably the most critical, difficult time in our state's history. Now, House Bill 125, you are exactly right about House Bill 125. That was the bill, you recall, Representative Michael Echols' bill, Danielle, that would have strictly prohibited our foreign adversaries from buying agricultural property in Louisiana. It's no secret that the Chinese government and other foreign entities want to buy up our critical infrastructure, and that includes our agricultural land. Well, Michael Echols brought a very good bill forward, hugely important bill to prohibit that from occurring. It passed the House and the Senate in the regular session, gets to the veto override session, passes out of the House, and fails to override the governor's veto in the Senate because of the no vote of two rhino Republicans and because Patrick Connick couldn't find his way into the Senate chamber to register a vote on that important bill. And you recall, Danielle, also that we've actually played the very inspiring remarks from Representative Chuck Owen on the floor of the House talking about how critically important it is to override that veto. Well, Patrick Connick must not have heard Chuck Owen's eloquent remarks, passionate remarks, because he wasn't in the Senate chamber, failed to show up for that vote in the veto override session, failed by 3 votes.
Yes, and in digging into his record, he hasn't been absent for that many votes. So I think it's very powerful, the votes that he has just absolutely been absent for. They're not, naming of schools and getting a different license plate created. These are important votes that he's missed.
Yes, and we're not talking here, when you talk about House Bill 125, when you're talking about a bill that would prohibit by law our enemies from buying agricultural land in Louisiana, that is an issue, Danielle, that every Republican that I know, certainly, and almost every Democrat that I know would look at and say, this transcends ideology or partisan politics. This is something that all of us should be concerned by, whether we are liberal, conservative, Republican, or Democrat.
It's existential.
It's existential, exactly. I know there are a lot of Democrats in Timothy Kerner's district who probably are equally offended by Patrick Connick's failure to show up and support this legislation in a veto override, as are the Republicans.
Yes. And Chris, you already touched on his inability or unwillingness to support the people and fight for the people during the 2020 lockdowns and COVID. But he also did very, very little. Actually, he voted against a lot of bills that would have protected children, that would have protected business rights during a time of COVID or related to COVID vaccines. So one of the first ones we wanted to mention is House Bill 399.
Yeah, House Bill 399. This was Representative Kathy Edmonston's bill, Danielle, that would have required that the Department of Education, Department of Health, anytime they send out immunization requirements, that they have to include in those notices the fact that the recipient has the legal right to exempt, to refuse the vaccine. Just notify them of that right anytime you send out an immunization notice. Many Louisianans during the COVID lockdown had no idea that they have a legal right to refuse the jab, to refuse the COVID shot. They just didn't know. And this legislation addressed that issue to make sure that all Louisiana citizens know and are fully aware of the fact that they are not compelled to take a vaccine. Well, Patrick Connick, along with Rogers Pope and the notorious rhino Fred Mills, voted against that bill and failed in the veto override session to override the governor's veto. Very, very sad that Patrick Connick would oppose that very common sense legislation, House Bill 399.
Well, it's an elitist vote in my view, because it just says that we believe that you should not even know your rights. And to me, that's just beyond the pale. And to this day, people are not getting exemption notices, so they don't know their rights in a lot of ways. You said they didn't know in 2020, but they don't know to this day in many cases because of the way that he voted this past session.
Of lovely wife of 23 years, Katie, showed me a notice that one of her friends gave her, immunization notices that was sent from one of the schools right here in Baton Rouge, talking about all of the required immunizations that the children need to have. And nowhere on that notice was any statement that you have a right to exempt from the vaccines. You have a statutory right. Nowhere on there. You know why? Because people like Patrick Connick made sure that legislation that would have required it failed. It is an elitist vote, and it's truly sad.
It is truly sad. And Kathy Edmonston also brought forward another bill that he voted against, House Bill 182.
House Bill 182 that finally and mercifully in the state of Louisiana would have categorically prohibited the COVID shot for any public or private school in Louisiana. And Patrick Connick opposed that legislation. I do not know why, but he seems to like the big pharmacists, and he seems to like mandatory vaccines and not giving citizens notice of their rights. That's certainly what it appears to be.
Yep. And even on that note, he voted in favor of Representative Freiberg's Pharmacy Administration of Vaccines bill, Chris, that you and I were turning purple over during session.
This was your least favorite piece of legislation because both of your parents are pharmacists and your parents talked to you about this legislation and how bad it was. House Bill 471, if it had passed, would have allowed pharmacists across the board to administer vaccines to any child age 7 and up without a prescription from a doctor. Imagine the horrors of that. And what could possibly go wrong with that? However, Patrick Connick supported that legislation. And fortunately, Representative Thomas Presley and a couple of other legislators were able to kill that horrible piece of legislation at the 11th hour. But no thanks to Patrick Connick.
Yeah. And then, Chris, we wanted to also remind folks of what happened in 2021, a bill that Connick voted against that would have prohibited civil liability against any business for refusing to require the COVID shot for their employees.
Hugely significant legislation, Danielle, as you said, 2021, I believe. House Bill 103, Danny McCormick, at a time when both the state and the federal government and every federal and state agency in the country was pressuring and cajoling and doing everything within their power to force employers to mandate the COVID shot for their employees. Representative McCormick's bill would have prohibited any kind of civil liability on a business that refused to mandate the COVID shot on their employees, and would have prohibited the state from withholding any business license or permit to any business that refused to mandate the COVID shot. Patrick Connick was one of two Republicans, only two Republicans to vote against this legislation, and it failed narrowly. Actually, it passed, but it did not pass by a veto-proof majority because of Patrick Connick and two rhinos. So it was vetoed by the governor, and it was not even heard in the veto override session, I believe, because the governor knew that he could count on Patrick Connick and those two rhinos to make sure that the Senate did not get to the 26 votes necessary to override that veto. Very, very sad that Patrick Connick would stand against employers who did not want to ever mandate the COVID shot on their employees, and stand against a bill that would have protected them from civil liability for declining to do so.
Yeah, and you already mentioned, Chris, I mean, one of the reasons this vote is so offensive to me is that we know, as you mentioned earlier, that Connick is a personal injury attorney. He has a law office in Marrero, and his law firm is named after him. And so I would imagine that he doesn't have a boss, is my point. And so there's no one there to mandate the shot for him, but he's perfectly happy for everybody else's boss to mandate the shot for them. So that's offensive on its face to me. And then, was there something he stood to gain if this went awry? Because he is a personal injury attorney. I'm not saying there's a direct conflict of interest, but it is suspicious.
Well, it is suspicious, not only because he is a personal injury attorney, but he's funded substantially by trial attorneys, personal injury attorneys, who I guarantee you do not want to do anything to diminish civil liability on the part of employers. They make their living by suing people. And so certainly he's going to oppose, and they're going to oppose, legislation that narrows or forecloses opportunities for businesses to be sued for money. It's that simple. So it's really, as disappointing as it is, Danielle, it's really not surprising that Connick opposed House Bill 103, because he is subsidized by a special interest group that I guarantee you was opposed to it and told him not to support it. And he did what they said to do. And in doing so, he was not serving the citizens of his district or the citizens of Louisiana very well.
No, and I do think that it is worth mentioning that I believe Brandon Trosclair's federal lawsuit maybe did provide the relief that Louisiana and citizens across the country were looking for, but we could have done that ourselves without him having to sue.
We absolutely could have done it. We have the 9th and 10th Amendments of the United States Constitution. Our legislature absolutely had the authority to pass legislation protecting employers from suits for not mandating an experimental COVID shot. Yes, we did have the authority, but unfortunately not able to get the ball in the end zone because of rhinos like Patrick Connick.
It reminds me of that scripture with Esther where he said, for such a time as this, and if you don't rise up, then the Lord will rise someone else up in your place. And that's exactly what happened. So God is faithful, but it's no thanks to the vote from Patrick Connick on this one.
No, it's not.
So we also wanted to just remind folks about House Bill 648, the only bill that made it all the way through the veto override session successfully. Patrick Connick was absent for the vote, I believe, that referred it back to a different Senate.
That's exactly right. And just for the listeners' benefit, House Bill 648 was Gabe Fermet's bill that prohibits transgender mutilation procedures on minors in the state of Louisiana, chemical castration, puberty blockers, that sort of thing on minors in Louisiana. A critically important piece of legislation, which, as you said, ultimately did get all the way through the veto override session. But it's an interesting history that when that bill first went to the Senate committee, the Health and Welfare Committee, Fred Mills, the Rhino, fortunately, retiring Fred Mills, Republican chair of that committee, made sure that that bill was killed in committee. And that would have been the end of this important legislation, except for one thing: the outcry of citizens across Louisiana demanding that the bill be reheard. Well, the full Senate heard the cries of Louisiana citizens, and Senator Stewart Cathy made a motion on the full Senate floor to recommit that bill to committee. The bill was recommitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee and ultimately passed out and ultimately passed the full Senate. But again, will you venture a guess, Danielle, on the motion to recommit, that very critical vote? If that motion to recommit had not passed, this bill would have been dead, would have never been returned to committee, would have never passed. Guess who was absent for the vote to recommit in the full Senate, to recommit the bill that prohibits transgender mutilation procedures on our minors? Who wasn't there? I'll give you one guess for a million.
Yeah, I think it's the ally of our governor, Mr. Patrick Connick.
Could not find his way into the Senate chamber to vote on a bill to recommit this most important piece of social legislation back to committee. And it is disgraceful, in my view, that if other Senate leaders had followed his lead, genital mutilation procedures on minors in Louisiana would still be protected under law, and we would be the only state in the South that still allows it. We would be a sanctuary state for the type of barbarism that is even beyond description to talk about. If Patrick Connick had his way, and the voters in Plaquemines and Jefferson Parish, they absolutely have to know this.
Yeah. And last but not least, we wanted to also remind folks that Patrick Connick has done no favors for the Second Amendment in the state of Louisiana. And there's a very interesting story about this one, right, Chris?
Absolutely. House Bill 37 in 2022, Representative Danny McCormick. It was Danny McCormick's concealed carry bill, passed the House and then passed out of the Senate, but then goes into the Senate Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee because they were going to determine the fiscal impact of this on the state to make the appropriations for the bill. Well, Senator Patrick Connick in the Senate Fiscal and Revenue Committee proposed and attached amendments to this concealed carry legislation requiring background checks, requiring training, requiring permitting, and really diluted the purpose of the bill, really inconsistently with the Second Amendment, which says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and surely shall not be infringed through permitting, background requirements, classes that you have to take to be able to conceal carry. And in response to Senator Connick's basically killing of this legislation in the Senate Fiscal and Revenue Committee, Representative McCormick said that I am not going to compromise. I oppose these amendments because I'm not going to compromise when it comes to their Second Amendment rights. We are either a Second Amendment state or we are not. And Senator Connick apparently believes that there should be qualifications and all kind of conditions on the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And he contributed to the killing of that important Second Amendment legislation.
Yeah. And look, Representative McCormick and I are birds of a feather when it comes to the Second Amendment. You know that. I think our listeners know that by now. I am a big believer in shall not infringe. But this vote and this situation really, really gets my goat because it just points back to the elitism and the arrogance of Patrick Connick, because he was acting completely outside the scope of his mandate as a member of this committee. The Senate Fiscal Affairs Committee does not have any right to be changing the content of a bill. Their entire purpose was to look at the cost of the bill. And so operating outside of the mandate, killing the Second Amendment bill. It's just very upsetting, and I think it's very telling, and I think it's really, really important for his constituents and frankly the whole state to know that this is the kind of behavior that's happening behind the closed doors of committees.
Very, very well said. And if it wasn't for the State of Freedom, if it wasn't for LeCag, nobody would know what Patrick Connick did in this situation. Nobody would probably know what he did on the recommit vote on 648, the transgender mutilation bill, or a number of other things. Very few people would probably know that he didn't stand with the citizens of Louisiana during the lockdown and all of the other dubious marks on Connick's track record, Danielle. But you just said that so very well. That committee didn't even have the authority to do anything on regarding the merits of Representative McCormick's concealed carry bill, but they did. And Connick led that charge.
Yeah. So all we can say is that we heartily are endorsing Tim Kerner Jr. because he is a man who's standing up to fight for the people. Look, he came onto our show today. I mean, he's pretty sick, poor guy, but he was adamant that he wanted to come on. He wanted to make sure that people could hear his perspective, understand that he is standing up to fight for them, that he is one of them. He's not above them. He's with them and he's for them, and he wants to fight and he wants to work alongside them to rebuild his communities and to put this state in the right direction.
And I believe he's going to do so. As he said, Danielle, the outpouring of support that he's received in his district is truly amazing. I think people are tired of old-time rule by fear politics and politicians. The people are ready to be served again, ready to be heard again. And I think Timothy Kerner is the man to fill that position. I'm just very excited to be supporting him. I want to encourage our listeners, first of all, thank our listeners for supporting the LeCag PAC. I encourage our listeners to donate to the LeCag PAC at www.lacag.org.
Yes, and for anyone who's looking for ways to support the State of Freedom podcast, we'd love for you to do that by visiting our webpage, which is freedomstate.us. If you're interested in advertising, you can do that as well. Just shoot us an email at info@freedomstate.us, and we can get you all the details for that.
What we're doing, Danielle, it is so exciting to be advancing a platform across Louisiana that allows citizens, candidates, representatives to come on and share their conservative vision with listeners across the state. That is how we are revolutionizing the way political advocacy is done, because the more we expand, the more people listen, the more people share, subscribe, and donate and support the State of Freedom, the broader our voice becomes. And you and I have made the commitment before that we are not going to compromise on constitutional conservatism. Our loyalty is to the people, number one, and number two, to the Constitution that they and we created. And we will remain that way. And I'm just so excited about broadening our voice across the state for the principles that Louisiana citizens share so that they no longer feel suffocated and ignored. And I'll tell you, Danielle, that if we continue to move forward at the pace we are moving at, we are going to recapture the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. I'm here for it, Chris.
God bless you.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.